namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. One year of the Ukraine war. It's the big story of the day. Speeches are being made, tributes are being paid, threats are being issued, and attacks are being launched. New potential peacemakers are emerging, but peace remains elusive. On Vantage tonight, we'll take you to 5 different countries that have emerged as the biggest stakeholders in this war. 5 cities that have been the nerve centers of the strategy and the politics. Kiev, Moscow, London, Washington, and Paris. As a team of reporters brings you the mood and developments on the ground. Also a special report on what this war has cost the world, how much money, and how India has emerged a leader, an outlier, and a responsible world power. We'll bring you all of this and more. First, the headlines. Is there a new arms race in the Pacific? Malaysia and Indonesia are worried. Australia has sent assurances to Thailand that its plans to acquire a new fleet of nuclear submarines would enhance collective security of the region. It's a China versus US war of words over Hong Kong. A Chinese diplomat has warned the US Consul General in Hong Kong against crossing political red lines. This is after the Americans said Hong Kong's freedoms were eroding. At the first major event of India's G20 presidency, Prime Minister Narendra Modi asks the group to focus on unsustainable debt that is threatening many nations. He's also urged the bloc to have an inclusive agenda to win back the confidence of the world.
Food and energy security have become major concerns across the world. Even the financial viability of many countries is threatened by unsustainable debt levels.
The world is crying onion tears. From Turkey to Kazakhstan, major shortage is pushing up prices. In the Philippines, onions are now more expensive than meat. And Netflix has cut prices in more than 100 countries in a bid to attract more subscribers. The online streaming service has reduced its subscription cost by up to 50%. February 24, 2022, exactly 365 days ago, Russia attacked Ukraine. The overwhelming prediction was this, that the conflict will see a swift end and Kiev will fall within days. That didn't happen though. 1 year later, Ukraine is standing and Putin plans to double down. He is bringing reinforcements. He has sought China's help and China seems ready to oblige. The West has repeatedly warned China against this, but they haven't really spelled out how China will intervene. How will it enter the conflict militarily? Tonight, we come with some answers. We've accessed specific details, like the arms China could provide, the name of the manufacturer, the mode of supplying these weapons to Russia. And like I've said before, this could change a lot. It could change the course of the war. So here's what we know about China's plans. It will share killer drones with Russia. How many? At least 100. Kamikaze drones to begin with. What are kamikaze drones? They're small unmanned aircraft. They're packed with explosives. They get their name from Japanese kamikaze pilots, the ones who carried out suicide attacks during the Second World War. The US Navy feared them the most because these pilots used to crash into enemy targets. Their aircraft used to be packed with explosives. Now these Chinese drones work the same way. The only difference is they can be unmanned. They don't need a pilot. They're small, they're cheap, they're very hard to detect. China could provide such drones to Russia. The transfer could happen as soon as April this year. Reports say discussions are underway. The Russian military is driving these talks. A Chinese drone manufacturer is at the center of this effort. The name of the company is Xi'an Bingo Intelligent Aviation Technology. It has agreed to mass-produce drones for Russia. They will make it. They will test it. The name of this drone is ZT-180. It can carry a heavy warhead, up to 50 kilograms to be exact. Chinese kamikaze drones fit right into Russia's war strategy. The Russian military has been using them in Ukraine. Moscow got these drones from Iran first. China could be the second supplier. And it has taken a while to decide. Reports say last year China made a plan. It involved the People's Liberation Army, or the PLA. They were supposed to deliver replacement parts for Russian fighter jets. And how would they do that? Falsify shipping documents, disguise the military parts of the military aircraft, disguise them, present them as parts of civilian planes. This was the plan. And we're not sure if China implemented it, but now we know it is determined to help Russia. Reports say Xi'an, the company making these drones, will also deliver parts. They will also share know-how. The idea basically is to make Russia self-reliant. With the help of Chinese parts and know-how, the Russians should be able to make their own kamikaze drones. So the plan seems to be in place. The supply chain is ready. So is the transportation. What they're waiting for is the green light from Beijing. Will it come, though? Will China give the go-ahead and arm Russia? For the moment, Beijing is distancing itself from the company. And the United States is maintaining pressure. Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued another warning. Listen to this.
President Biden was on a video conference with President Xi and said to him very directly, very clearly, that any Chinese military support for Russia in this conflict, or for that matter, the systematic evasion of sanctions, would be a serious problem for the relationship between the United States and China.
So that was Blinken's message to China. Even Europe is concerned. Josep Borrell is the EU's top diplomat. He met with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi last week. Borrell says he asked Wang Yi about this, whether China will arm Russia. He asked him, and Wang Yi said no. But Borrell isn't taking his answer at face value.
When I asked him about the possible military support of China to Russia, he was very clear and assertive. I can only repeat what he told me. China is not providing arms to Russia. Certainly, we have to remain vigilant.
We have to be vigilant, he says. Borrell was at the United Nations yesterday. There was an important vote at the UN General Assembly, a vote that Russia lost. Basically, the UN wants Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. That was the vote. 141 countries voted in favor, 7 were against, 32 abstained. Russia called the vote, quote-unquote, unbalanced and anti-Russian. And India was one of the countries that abstained. So did China. Remember, this whole exercise was symbolic. This vote, the United Nations vote, has no legal binding on Russia. Yes, it makes a statement, but it will not lead to a Russian withdrawal. In fact, the UN has never been able to stop or end any war. So it changes nothing on the ground, but Ukraine tried to make the most of it.
This vote defies the argument that Global South does not stand on Ukraine's side, because many countries representing Latin America, Africa, Asia voted in favor today.
Back in Kiev, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is declaring a win too. On the anniversary of the war, the first anniversary, Zelensky released a video. The title of the video was this: The Year of Invincibility. Ukraine's president claims they'll win the war this year.
Великі народи великої України.
We will defeat all threats. Shelling, bombs, missiles, kamikaze drones, blackouts, cold. We are stronger than all this. It was a year of endurance, a year of compassion, a year of bravery, a year of pain, a year of hope, a year of perseverance, a year of unity, a year of invincibility, a fierce year of invincibility. Its main conclusion is that we have survived. We had not been defeated, and we will do everything to win this war.
Це був рік стійкості.
Full marks for theatrics. But the plan itself sounds a bit far-fetched, especially when you consider the shortage of ammunition. Zelensky's message makes one thing clear, though. Ukraine is in no mood to negotiate. It wants to fight this out on the battlefield. And what's the mood on the ground? Well, it's somber. Ukrainians are still living in fear. They don't know where the next attack would come from. Today, ceremonies were held across the country as the attacks continued. Russia has launched a fresh wave of strikes. Russian troops are closing in on Bakhmut. It's an important city in eastern Ukraine. The Wagner group is said to have made advances here. It says it took control of a village.
Верховка полностью взята под наш контроль. Подразделение ЧВК «Вагнер».
The battle for the east is important. If Russia is successful, Putin will be emboldened to make more advances. And if Ukraine manages to hold on, it could weaken Russian forces on the ground. That's not happening yet. Russia remains on the offensive, backed by Chinese support. Beijing is taking on the West It's accusing the West of pouring fuel into the fire.
乌克兰危机至今已有1年。
The international community should make joint efforts to facilitate peace talks. 1 year in the Ukraine crisis, brutal facts offer an ample proof that sending weapons will not bring peace. Adding fuel to the fire will only exacerbate tensions. Prolonging and expanding the conflict will only make ordinary people pay an even heftier price.
And leading the Western response is Germany. The German foreign minister said, "We did not want this war, in fact. We did not choose the war." This is what she said. And that the German government would much rather focus every bit of our energy and money in fixing our schools and fighting the climate crisis and strengthening social justice. She ended her speech with this.
But the truth is, if Russia stops fighting, this war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And the human suffering would continue every single day.
Meanwhile, China has proposed a peace plan, a 12-point peace plan. It calls for a ceasefire, security guarantees for Russia, no sanctions on Moscow, humanitarian corridors, and the resumption of dialogue between Moscow and Kiev. It looks fine on paper, except that Ukraine was not consulted and the West will not be on board. And now let's take you to our reporters from 5 cities to bring us ground reports. We are taking you to Kiev, Moscow, Washington, London and Paris, since most of the action around the war has been seen in these capitals. First, let's go to Ukraine. William Denslow is holding fort for us in Kiev. William, you're in the thick of the war. What is the mood in Kiev today? In recent days, Russia has targeted the city with missiles. And we've seen what Ukraine and Kiev have gone through in the past 1 year. Are the people of Ukraine still as determined as before to keep fighting the Russian military?
In an incredibly poignant day here in Ukraine, we've heard from the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He says that on the 24th of February a year ago, Ukraine essentially had a choice. He said that Ukrainians chose to wave not the white flag of surrender, but instead to wave the yellow and blue flag of Ukraine. He said that the past year, Ukraine has seen pain, sorrow, faith, as well as unity. He added that 2023 will be the year of Ukraine's victory. President Zelensky has also addressed Ukrainian troops here in the country's capital, Kyiv. He says that it is you, the troops, that decide the fate of Ukraine, and he says that they decide whether the country will continue to exist, as he thanks the forces for their continued efforts fighting against Russian forces. Now, of course, on this anniversary, there have been widespread expectations that we could see an escalation in Russian missile strikes as precaution schools here in Kyiv have been urged to switch their schooling from in-person to remote learning. People are being encouraged as well, if you're not an essential worker, to work from home as possible. Now, we've heard from a spokesperson for the Air Force. He says that the country is expecting the possibility of Russia to spend special deliveries in the form of airstrikes, but he says that because Ukraine was expecting it, he says that Russia might choose to increase missile attacks on a different day.
Right. Poignant, yet determined to fight. That's how Kiev is today. Let's look at what's happening in Moscow. What is the mood in Moscow? Stuart Smith is joining us from there. Stuart, earlier this week, Putin delivered his assessment of what he calls a special military operation, still not a war. The Russian president wants to keep going. What are the Kremlin's priorities right now?
Well, if the Russian President Vladimir Putin had wanted to signal a change in objectives or a change of strategy, he would have mentioned it during his 2-hour-long speech on Tuesday to Russia's Federal Assembly. But there, he quite simply stated more of the same, that Moscow was committed to removing what he described as a neo-Nazi government in Kiev, that it was committed to, quote, liberating the people of the Donbass region, and that Russia was facing an existential threat due to US and NATO weapons deliveries to Ukraine. And so that means Russia has to keep fighting, the president says. As to fighting for how long or how far, he didn't say, although there was some detail provided by Dmitry Medvedev, a former president of Russia, and also currently the deputy chairman of the National Security Council. He said Russia's willing to go all the way to Poland if that's what's required to ensure its security. Now, that would mean, in practice, taking over all of Ukraine, and so far, Russian forces have not managed to fully control even one of the annexed territories of Ukraine after a year.
I think what you started with, the more of the same, is what sums up the story of this war. Kiev's biggest ally in this war has been the United States. Nick Harper is standing by in Washington, D.C. Nick, Joe Biden made a statement with his visit to Kiev earlier this week. He also promised more support, but no fighter jets to Ukraine. How far is America willing to go and prepared to go in its quest to defeat Russia in this war?
Well, throughout, President Biden has had to walk a fine line, wanting to show his continued support to Ukraine and to NATO members in Europe, but also being careful not to escalate the situation and further anger Russia. That's been really the big concern from Washington during this last 12 months. They've wanted to supply weapons, and we've seen them supply increasingly more powerful weapons. But at the same time, the Biden administration has been very nervous about giving very powerful weaponry. There was a considerable delay in agreeing to sending tanks, and they're still drawing the line to sending fighter jets to Ukraine.
Right, so they want to keep supporting Ukraine, but not cross certain red lines with Russia. Let's go straight to London, where Ollie Barrett is joining us from. Ollie, Zelensky paid a high-profile visit to London recently. What is Westminster's latest assessment of this war?
The UK assumption is that the war is really not going anywhere near according to Vladimir Putin's plan. We've been hearing from the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace in comments made and interviews given to mark the first anniversary of the invasion, and he's been saying that from the UK's perspective, Vladimir Putin has achieved almost none of his aims in this war, particularly when it comes to territorial advances. Ben Wallace has been reminding people that in the view of UK intelligence, Vladimir Putin was hoping to take Kiev within days and to really move through other Ukrainian cities very quickly indeed, and really effectively take vast swathes of the country within days, if not weeks, after February the 24th last year. And Ben Wallace has been very keen to remind everyone that from a UK perspective, in terms of UK intelligence and a UK assessment, that Vladimir Putin has effectively failed in that regard. The other thing that Ben Wallace is pointing to is an intelligence assessment which is shared by UK and US officials that Russia has lost or seen injured at least 180,000 personnel in this war, and that is another way that the UK is pointing to what it says is a failure by Vladimir Putin.
And finally, Ross Cullen is joining us from Paris. Ross, French President Emmanuel Macron wants to keep a door open for negotiations. He wants to reach out to Moscow. Are other European leaders ready to support his efforts for a negotiated settlement?
Well, the European Union has been calling for peace and for an end to the war since the conflict began 1 year ago. It wants an immediate end to hostilities, an immediate ceasefire, and for Russia to withdraw all its troops from inside Ukraine. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron saying this month that the only peace plan he's interested in is the one that's been proposed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. France saying that not only does it want to just support that plan, but also promote that plan on the wider world stage. Now, the European Union says that Ukraine's full sovereignty must be respected, and it wants Russia to cede control of the 4 areas of eastern Ukraine that Moscow claims as its own, but a move which has been condemned by the United Nations. The European Union is aware, however, of the complexities on the ground during a war, especially as Russia steps up its offensive to try to control more areas in the east of Ukraine.
So the overwhelming sentiment seems to be that the war is not going away anytime soon, and we can expect more of the same. William, Stuart, Ollie, Nick and Ross, thank you very much for bringing us updates from 5 different cities across the world. And we'll have more from all these cities later tonight. Do not miss our special broadcast on 1 year of the Ukraine war, where we bring you ground reports from 5 different centers: Kiev, Moscow, London, Washington and Paris. Watch it only on Firstpost. And now to the million-dollar question. What happens next? Well, a lot depends on one man, Russian President Vladimir Putin. So far, the war has not panned out the way he wanted. But the failures on the battlefield have not really impacted his grip on power. There is no threat to his position at home. There is no challenger in sight in Moscow. So Putin is still in the driver's seat, and he has already made his position clear. The Russian president says he will keep on fighting.
Step by step, we will carefully and systematically solve the problems before us.
That was Putin's message a few days ago. He's a man on a mission. For him, the battle for Ukraine is a personal one. Ukraine was a part of the erstwhile Soviet Union. It split in August 1991. A few months later, in December the same year, the Soviet Union fell apart. Putin termed its collapse as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. In the years that followed, as NATO expanded its wings in the region and Ukraine got closer to the West, Putin's urge for revenge grew stronger. For the Russian president, any attempt to integrate Ukraine into the West is a red line, one that shouldn't be crossed. It is also a personal loss for him, because as president, Putin has made efforts to keep Ukraine within Russia's fold. Let me show you some pictures, in fact. They're from 2004. And that is Putin in central Kiev attending a parade as a special guest. It was a special occasion, the anniversary of the liberation of Ukraine from Nazi Germany. On display was Soviet-style pomp and politics. Putin was visiting Kiev just before a presidential election. Alongside him was Viktor Yanukovych. He was then a presidential candidate, seeking Putin's endorsement perhaps. Yanukovych went on to win this election. Amid allegations of vote rigging, he eventually went on to serve as the fourth president of Ukraine. You see, Putin's influence ran deep in Kiev. But that's not the case anymore. With this war, perhaps he wants to regain the influence. But why did he make such a risky gamble for it? You could say that's Putin's style. He takes risks, sometimes to the point of brinkmanship. In his early days, it is said that he was combative in school. He did not hesitate in picking a fight. At the age of 16, he apparently approached the KGB himself. KGB was the intelligence agency of the Soviet Union. Putin went to the headquarters in Leningrad himself, and he wanted to meet an officer to ask what he had to do to become a spy. From his KGB days to the presidency, Putin continued to rely on his risk-taking abilities. He went to war in Georgia. He sent troops to support the Assad regime in Syria. He also annexed Crimea, an operation that perhaps laid the groundwork for the current invasion of Ukraine. And interestingly, Putin has never lost a war. He has no intention of losing in Ukraine either. But how does he plan to reverse his fortunes? How will he win in Ukraine? With more troops, weapons, and firepower. That's what he's betting on. Moscow has already mobilized 500,000 new conscripts. In the long term, he wants to expand military ranks. Putin has already approved the plans. The size of the military will go up by 50%. So the Russian president is preparing for the long haul. And it may not end with Ukraine. Reports say Russia could deploy new forces near Finland. Reports say this, a country that's seeking NATO's protection, that's Finland. Finland has applied to become a member of the NATO. So is Putin preparing for a wider conflict? No signs of that yet. But more significantly, no signs of scaling down either. But every war comes at a cost. And the war in Ukraine came with a hefty price tag. Do you know how much? How much did the global economy suffer in 2022? How much loss did this war inflict on the world? A whopping $1.6 trillion. That was the loss. $1.6 trillion in 2022 alone. That's according to the German Economic Institute. The deepest impact was on the West. They lost 2/3 of their global production. No one has suffered more than Europe in this war. The war upended the region. In November, the European Commission shared a grim prediction. And I have it with me. This is what it says. Amid elevated uncertainty, high energy price pressures, erosion of households' purchasing power, a weaker external environment, and tighter financing conditions are expected to tip the EU, the euro area, and most member states into recession. So a recession seems certain. Germany alone will suffer a loss of $171 billion. That's around 4% of Germany's GDP. Cutting off energy from Russia is inflicting a heavy cost on them. The bills for businesses are going up. This year, the German industry will pay 40% more for energy. And what happens if the war continues? If Russia and Ukraine keep fighting this year, what happens then? The losses for the global economy could double. Last year, the OECD released a report. The OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They released a report, and this is an intergovernmental organization. 38 countries are members of this group. And how much, in terms of losses, did the OECD predict from the war? $2.8 trillion. Throughout 2022, the world felt the impact of the war. Global supply chains were broken, which led to shortages. The war triggered shortage of food, and inflation was quick to follow. 2022 was the year of brutal inflation. Global inflation touched almost 9%. For comparison, in 2021, it was 3.5%. Last year, it was 9%. So inflation almost tripled. What about India? The Indian economy was largely insulated from the worst impacts of this, but not completely. India's inflation rate reached almost 8% in April 2022. In recent weeks, inflation has dropped below the 7% point, which is a positive sign. What about the markets? Well, they seesawed throughout last year. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February, India's Sensex crashed by 2,700 points, the fourth worst fall. The Nifty plunged 815 points. It was the worst fall since March 2020 when the pandemic broke out. By November, the markets were touching fresh highs and breaking records, again a sign of confidence. But the war is not over yet, remember. 2022 proved that we do not live in isolation. We cannot remain disconnected from what's happening in the world, unimpacted. What happens in the world affects all of us, and we can only hope that the worst is behind us. Here's a question now. What is common between the following items? Gym memberships, cookbooks, and gift cards. Well, each of them is an item bought, and each of them is an item often unused. The story is about the last item on the list. And listen to this. In the US, $21 billion of unspent money is tied up in unused and lost gift cards. $21 billion in gift cards that were never used. Before we discuss how this happened, let's understand what gift cards are. Think of them as prepaid debit cards. They're loaded with a specific amount, and with that amount, you can buy goods or services, like a visit to a spa or a dress of your choice. These cards are usually given as gifts, hence the name gift cards, but the retail industry has another term for them. They call them stored value products. It's because they store their value very well, sometimes permanently. Almost 2/3 of Americans have at least one unspent gift card. At least half of them lose it before it is used. And most of them say their cards are worth about $200. About 4% of gift card cash goes unspent every year, and it adds up. For the US, it's about $2 to $4 billion. And the US is the world's biggest market for gift cards. In 2022, the American market was worth $340 billion. What about India? India's current gift card industry is valued at over $39 billion, and it's growing, especially after the pandemic. Globally, this industry is expected to reach $2.3 trillion by 2030. 2.3 trillion of gift cards. Australia, India, China, and South Korea will lead the growth. So basically, more and more people the world over are gifting cards. then why aren't we using them? Maybe it's the indifference. A gift card is less personal. It's easy to lose and forget. If it's digital, it gets buried under 1,000 other unchecked emails. If it's tangible, it remains tucked inside a drawer, patiently waiting for your attention. Does this mean that a gift card is a bad gift? Well, the answer depends on whom you ask. We can offer data if you like. In 2020, for the 13th straight year, cards were the gift of choice in the US. Do you know how much money people put in gift cards? 55% of their annual gift budget goes into cards, and yet they remain unused. Even in this economy, when inflation is so high, what explains this? Well, inertia to start with. Sometimes we don't like the store the voucher belongs to, or we don't really want to physically go there to get something. But by doing this, we're ignoring free money. Plus, your card value is going down. You're losing value. Inflation is eating away at it. So not redeeming your gift cards is clearly bad for you. Do you know who it's good for? The companies that sell these cards. Well, they get money. It's like an advance payment for them. With unredeemed cards, it becomes revenue. And retail companies make millions from this. They have a term for it. It's called breakage. It's the amount of money left unredeemed on a gift card. Look at the breakage numbers from 2019. Starbucks earned $140 million. Nordstrom made $17 million. And the Cheesecake Factory made $8 million. That's a lot of money. And we unwittingly contribute to it every year. Does redeeming that gift card sound like a good idea now? And remember, if you don't want to use it, you can always encash, exchange, or sell it. And the next time you're giving someone a gift card, remember, you may be gifting something to the shareholders of that company too. And like I said, India did not suffer the worst of it. Quite the opposite, actually. India is predicted to be the fastest growing major economy this year. And this is not just a fluke. It's not like India just got lucky. India remains strong because of its approach to this war, because of how it handled the crisis and the policy it followed. It's a policy that keeps India first, a policy that balances national interest with international responsibility without grandstanding. The past 1 year has made India an outlier, also a leader. Tonight, we want to talk about how India navigated this global storm. The 5 things that made India stand out. First, India's neutral and pragmatic stance. Second, its influence over Russia. Third, its potential to play peacemaker. Fourth, India's decision to buy Russian oil despite Western pressure. And fifth, its ability to call out the West's hypocrisy. 5 things that contributed to how India fared. Let's take these one by one. India has consciously chosen not to parrot the West's script, because the diktat from the West is quite clear. You're either with us or against us. India refused to play that game from day one. Just yesterday, India abstained on a vote against Russia at the United Nations. The 47th time it has done this. You see, the United Nations has become a playground for the West to flex its diplomatic muscle. But sanctions and censure do not resolve wars or conflicts, so India has abstained. It has steered clear of the West's economic war against Russia. New Delhi is not a signatory to any sanctions against Russia. Instead, it has chosen the path of quiet yet constructive diplomacy, which brings us to point number 2, India's leverage with Russia. The West has now acknowledged it, that India's influence over Moscow is an asset. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the same in a recent interview. He said that India prevented Russia from using nukes. He said the US intelligence had a tip-off that Russia could use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine last year. Guess who intervened? India did. Last year, the CIA chief had a similar story to tell. In fact, I have a quote from what he said. I think it has also been very useful that Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi in India have also raised their concerns about the use of nuclear weapons. I think that's also having an impact on the Russians. India has quietly been working behind the scenes. It played a role in persuading Russia to stop shelling in the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. It engaged in back-channel diplomacy to get the Ukraine grain deal signed. That's how India has contributed. Point number 3, India is a potential peacemaker. Well, how's that? India is a strategic partner of both America and Russia. It has leverage with both. It may have strong ties with Russia, but that doesn't mean it condones Russia's war. Here's a quote. Today's era is not an era of war, and I have spoken to you on the phone about this. Do you know who said that? Prime Minister Modi of India. He said this to Russian President Vladimir Putin point blank, that this is not an era of war. And this was at the SCO summit last year, and it had just the right impact. The West welcomed Prime Minister Modi's remark. The world realized that when India speaks, Putin listens. Also, when the West puts pressure, India can resist. That's point number 4, buying Russian oil. Last summer was a period of chaos. The world's energy sector was in crisis. Oil prices had shot through the roof, but India remained largely unhurt. How did that happen? It's because India increased purchases of Russian oil. This oil was coming at steep discounts, and India bought it. Latest data suggests that Russia now fulfills 30% of India's oil needs. Last month, India bought 1.4 million barrels of oil from Russia, the highest amount it has ever purchased from Russia. And India is unapologetic. The West complained, of course, and repeatedly. Listen to what the White House said in April last year.
Well, the president both conveyed that we are here to help them diversify their means of importing oil. Again, the imports from the United States are already significant, or much bigger than the imports that they get from Russia. And we, of course, the president conveyed very clearly that it is not in their interest to increase that. But beyond that, I would let the Indian leaders speak for themselves.
It was basically a sermon on why India should not buy Russian oil, and many others spoke in the same vein. Foreign Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, told the West to back off.
It is our fundamental obligation to ensure that the Indian consumer has the best possible access on the most advantageous terms to international markets. And in that respect, quite honestly, we have seen that the India-Russia relationship has worked to advantage. So if it works to my advantage, I would like to keep that going.
If it works to my advantage, I would like to keep it going. Quite a confident declaration there, and not a one-off. Over the past year, India took on the West. It stood up to tremendous Western pressure, and it exposed the West's hypocrisy repeatedly. And now European leaders are echoing India's line. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz quoted India's foreign minister at the Munich Security Conference. Let me tell you what he said. Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. New Delhi is showing the West a mirror, and the West is not delighted by what it sees in that mirror. The world order is changing, India is emerging taller, and on the right side of history. And now to growing tensions in the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has test-fired strategic cruise missiles, and 4 of them. This was on Thursday, its 3rd such test in a week. What are strategic cruise missiles? Essentially, these are North Korean long-range missiles that can carry nuclear warheads. And how have the US and South Korea responded? With more military drills of their own to simulate a response to a nuclear strike by Kim Jong-un. They've conducted what they call tabletop exercises. The war games are well and truly on in the Korean Peninsula. With this, North Korea has launched itself into global headlines again. This was a missile test, a strategic cruise missile test. 4 such missiles were fired towards the Sea of Japan. The missiles are called the Hwasal-2. They're nuclear capable. And with this test, North Korea has sent another warning to its rivals, South Korea and the United States. The drill clearly demonstrated once again the war posture of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's nuclear combat force, bolstering up in every way its deadly nuclear counterattack capability against the hostile forces. A lot of adjectives and a clear warning. This is the 3rd such test in a week. Just a few days back, North Korea had fired a pair of short-range missiles, along with another message to the US. This came from Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong. She said America should stop military drills with South Korea, else the Pacific Ocean would turn into North Korea's shooting range. Just before this, Pyongyang had tested an intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of more than 5,500 kilometers, one that could carry a nuclear bomb. It's clearly an escalation, and it's part of Kim Jong-un's bucket list for 2023. At the beginning of this year, he had vowed to boost his country's nuclear arsenal and build on the progress made last year. In 2022, North Korea hit a record. It launched at least 95 ballistic and other missiles, the highest ever for Pyongyang. In fact, reports say a record 23 missiles were tested in just 24 hours at one point. How are the United States and South Korea responding? With more drills. Washington held military drills with South Korea and Japan. It also conducted a tabletop drill with Seoul at the Pentagon on Wednesday, the 8th such drill in about a decade. What is a tabletop drill? Think of it like a brainstorming session. It's when key personnel from both sides get together, simulate their response to emergency situations, and see where they stand. In a statement, the Pentagon said this: given the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's recent aggressive nuclear policy and advancements in nuclear capabilities, the tabletop scenario focused on the possibility of Korea's use of nuclear weapons. On Thursday, both sides visited a submarine base in Georgia. The U.S. Navy showed South Korean officials its nuclear-powered ballistic submarines. Reports say the aim was to assure South Korea of America's commitment to protect them in the event of an attack. Seoul sees North Korea's recent activities as a launch pad for a 7th nuclear test.
North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles have not been launched at a normal angle so far. But the intelligence authority is seeing that North Korea has all the capabilities and seems to be preparing a timeline to boost the pressure effect on the United States. There is a possibility for a 7th test, which would be essential to complete the miniaturization and lightening of weight of nuclear bombs.
The concerns are not without basis. North Korea continues to make progress. Its nuclear inventory is growing. Despite the pandemic, the food shortages and the power crises, Kim is keeping Seoul, Washington and Tokyo on their toes. As if all the geopolitical tensions threatening to destroy the world were not enough, now zombies are on the rise. What are we talking about? A zombie drug that's spreading in the US. It eats away at people's skin, giving them a zombie-like appearance. It also partially sedates them. So they shuffle about like the zombies that you see on TV shows. We're not making this up. What is this drug? A potent mixture of animal tranquilizer and opioids like heroin or fentanyl. It's devastating the US, especially the city of Philadelphia. Reports say almost 90% of Philadelphia's opioids are laced with this tranquilizer, which means 90% of opioid consumers are taking the zombie drug. It's a dark twist in America's drug crisis. What are the authorities doing to contain it? Our next report takes you through America's very real zombie apocalypse.
What typically comes to your mind when you think of zombies? The Walking Dead? Reanimated corpses looking for brains to eat? Hulks of rotting flesh shuffling about? In America, that last part has become a reality. There's a drug in the US that's turning people into zombies. It's eating away at their flesh, leading to giant lesions, exposed bone, and a rotting stench. It's so bad that many are forced to get amputations. The drug causes users to hunch over, almost as though in a trance. People have been seen trying to walk while bent over, with their knuckles touching the ground. The sights look like they're right out of a zombie apocalypse movie. You'd think in this situation, the US is treating this like an existential threat, that the US government is sparing no effort to fight the outbreak. It might horrify you to know that it's barely noticed. Reports of this zombie drug date back to the early 2000s, but only late last year did the US Food and Drug Administration issue a warning. And to add insult to injury, they haven't even declared the drug causing the issues illegal yet. First, let's understand what this zombie drug is. One part is an opioid, like heroin or more commonly now, fentanyl. The other is xylazine, an animal tranquilizer that's legally available. It also goes by the street name Trank. It was created in 1962 and approved for use on animals. Xylazine is not meant for humans. It's a controlled veterinary substance. You need a prescription to get it, but these are relatively easy to obtain. Drug dealers have been mixing this tranquilizer with opioids and peddling the mixture on the streets. Both parts of the mix are addictive. They both lead to serious withdrawal symptoms, making it extremely difficult for users to stop. This is despite the horrifying damage to their bodies. But why do they start taking the zombie drug? Often, it's not intentional. In the US, many people get addicted to opioids after taking painkillers. They're prescribed legal opioid painkillers like OxyContin or Vicodin for genuine pain. This is even when other non-opioid painkillers can be used. The patients develop a dependency on the opioids and then move on to hard drugs. That's the American opioid crisis in a nutshell. Now, opioid addicts buy drugs from dealers. Some of them are given the zombie drug, and that's where the addiction begins. The recreational use of animal tranquilizers was first reported in Puerto Rico in the early 2000s. The Caribbean island essentially functions as a colony of the US. Since it isn't a full state, successive governments ignored the problem. Puerto Rico became known as Zombie Island. Over the years, the zombie drug has made it to the American mainland. Reports of its devastating effects were seen as early as 2019. People knew that xylazine was being used to spike opioids. Reports say it's found in 90% of the illegal opioids sold in Philadelphia. But the FDA has still not banned the tranquilizer. Only last November did it issue a warning. Why is the regulator dragging its feet? Does it not care about the people? Or does it care too much about pharma companies? Will America risk a zombie outbreak just to secure big pharma profits?
Our next story is about a partnership between super speed and super brains. Mercedes-Benz has teamed up with Google. This is a first for the luxury vehicles company. It aims to offer supercomputer-like performance in every car with automated driving sensors. But what does this even mean? How can and why should cars be like supercomputers? Also, is Mercedes just trying to play catch-up? Is it trying to match the software-powered features of Tesla and Chinese newcomers? Will it work for Mercedes? Is it working for the others? Our next report tries to answer these questions and more.
German car maker Mercedes-Benz has decided to team up with Google. They want to build cars which perform like supercomputers. Why should cars behave like computers? To become self-driving cars. In other words, Mercedes wants to make self-driving cars. And it wants Google to build the supercomputers for those. What are supercomputers? Machines that deliver much higher performance compared to your regular computers. Auto companies want them in cars. And for this, they're tying up with tech giants. So what will Google do with Mercedes? Give the cars superior navigation skills, offer traffic information, and automatically reroute them. It will also change the car entertainment systems. You'll be able to watch YouTube when the car is parked, or in Level 3 autonomous driving mode. This mode allows drivers to take their eyes off the wheel on certain roads. And Google is not the only companion for Mercedes on this journey. Other tech companies have been roped in, like semiconductor maker Nvidia and self-driving sensor maker Luminar. This will power the artificial intelligence of the car. The global market for self-driving cars is growing at a rate of 13% per year. By 2027, it's expected to cross 60 million units. Several automobile companies are entering the fray, turning cars into more than just a mode of transport, just like they turned phones into more than a mode of communication. Now it's your camera, your computer, your clock, wallet, navigation service, and a lot more. First, they offer the services, then they charge a premium on privacy. Cars could be next in line. Cars with internet and supercomputers. Top auto players are betting big on it. They're racing towards better innovation and innovating to race better. General Motors, Renault, Nissan, and Ford are among the car makers who have embedded Google services into their vehicles. They offer Maps and Google Assistant, which begs the obvious question: are these auto companies trying to play catch-up with Tesla and Chinese newcomers? Software-powered features in cars have been pioneered by Tesla. These features allow better performance, battery range, and self-driving capabilities. Our cars are getting smarter. They have begun to look like highly complex computer systems on wheels. These computer systems create an in-vehicle network. The cables, computers, and sensors serve as a nervous system. This allows different parts of the vehicle to communicate. But what about safety? Self-driving cars routinely make news for accidents like these. Safety is a big factor for buyers, as is fuel economy and resale value. Survey after survey shows that car buyers have difficulty trusting self-driven cars. But with big data, auto companies are looking for big results.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, no one thought it would go on for a year. Thousands of civilians and soldiers have been killed, millions displaced, the world stands divided. Many conferences, meetings, dialogues and pledges later, there is no end in sight. On the first anniversary of this war, tributes have been pouring in from across the world. At the same time, Russia celebrated Defender of the Fatherland Day. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Together, I have no doubt we'll keep the flame of liberty burning bright.
Very powerful poem about the Ukraine, but I think you will be back.